All right. So, hello everybody. This morning I'm going to talk to you about multiple account strategies for AWS and the things we learned during our migration to this process. But first, a little bit about us. Who are we? So we're Reality Mine. We've been around since 2012, and we provide market research, technology solutions into the market research industry. So this centers around passive metering of smartphone and desktop devices. So our customers, market research companies, can understand how users use their smartphones or their computers, what they do on the internet. So as you can imagine, we handle a lot of personal data, and security is very important to us. So let's look at the objectives for today. Oh, hang on. Sorry. How did that happen? There we go. So I'm Dave Lewthwaite. I'm the cloud architect at Reality Mine. I've been with the company for about 7 years now. I'm AWS certified. I architect primarily for AWS, but also Azure, OpenStack, DigitalOcean, and a few others. So have a look at the objectives for today's session. First of all, sorry, it's a paperless conference, but I've not got my notes. Why we have multiple accounts, ways to design your account layout, an example layout, which is what I'd recommend for a small business. The migration process as an overview using linked accounts and organizations. Centralized security and logging. I think I've got auto timing on, which is a bit of a problem. Permissions and role management. Centralizing the logins or the directory. So first of all, many people or businesses start working with AWS, and they open their first account. They do a bit of experimentation. Then maybe that experimentation turns into development. And then how often does that turn into production? And you're still in your one account. So how many people here have just the one AWS account? Just by a show of hands. Okay, good. How many people have 2 or more? And 3 or more? How about more than 10? A couple of people. Well, you might learn something, but maybe this isn't for you, we'll see. I am sorry, because he's going on too quickly. So, sorry. There's a few reasons why multi-account is a good idea. It's the hardest boundary that AWS provide for isolation. That is, you isolate your workloads, maybe dev and test and prod. If one of these accounts is compromised, let's say through a vulnerability in your development builds or a third-party library, they're not going to get into production. Likewise, if a developer is working on something, let's say they're developing a script for tidying up your account, and they don't get it quite right and maybe delete all your production instances. That's not so good either. So isolating those helps with that. Each account has a separate set of account limits. This is no good. Separate account limits. So that if you imagine your Lambda concurrency, for example, that's set at 1,000 concurrent executions per account per region. If you have an application which goes viral, for example, that's going to impact on your other Lambda applications. By splitting that up between accounts, you've got separate sets of limits. Likewise with numbers of instances and instance types and so on. You can have an account for experimentation. So I mentioned the cleanup tool, or where developers want to use a new product or feature on AWS, and they don't want to deal with permissions changes all the time. It's good for auditors. So it keeps your auditors happy. It's easy to understand that 2 separate accounts are 2 completely separate entities. So it makes it easier to get through. The accounts are free. There's no charge to set up. And your billing is consolidated. So it's no extra work for your finance team either. And you can have centralized user management through IAM and other mechanisms. So you've only got one place to manage users. But designing the layout is hard. Not a great deal of resources were available when we went through this process. Plenty on how to do it and why, but not actually the layout. And particularly for a small business. If you're not Netflix scale or Google scale or whoever, there wasn't a great deal of advice on what to do. So what works for a small company? Well, it really depends on your organization, unfortunately, and your business units and your development. I've given it away now. So the minimum, I'd choose an environment-based layout. Like this one. So starting with the lower section, we have a production account, a development account, hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory. Sandbox, This will be where you allow your users to do experimentation, play with new features, new products. Essentially, everything in this account is throwaway, and nobody should complain if you accidentally delete somebody else's resources. A backup account, this is where you would store your cross-region, cross-account snapshots of RDS, EBS, and so on, S3 buckets. But you can also choose, the security account is where your users are located and your auditing data. But you can also choose a team-based account. Maybe each team has their own set of accounts, or product-based. So widget A, widget B, separate accounts to deploy these in, or a combination thereof. So let's say your front-end development team could have a development account, production, QA, and so on. It depends on what complexity you want to go to. You can also have other single accounts in addition to this. So this would be things like a shared services account for putting Active Directory in or your log analysis. Or you want to separate the logging for auditing from your users. Delivery, CI/CD accounts are common as well. So you have an account dedicated just to doing your builds and deployment. And then, of course, there's QA as well. You can have different accounts for that. Many combinations that can be had. Depends on the complexity that you wish to go to or your business. But I think this is a good starting point when moving to multi-account. You can always extend it later. So we'll talk briefly about the migration. There is some links at the end with the formal documentation, so we'll just cover the process in brief. First of all, you need to choose a new master account, which is responsible for your billing or the organization parent. It's generally recommended you don't have any resources or users in this account, but it does still work if you do choose an existing account, and that's often a good place to start, particularly when you've already got stuff in production. You want to launch AWS organizations from the console. Choose Create Organization. Here you can choose from consolidated billing or all features. All features allows you to do more management of the sub-accounts, and it's what you should choose, really. I'll mention service control policies shortly. You need to wait to verify the master email account. And from this point, you can now create new accounts, or you can invite existing accounts. When you create new accounts, it automatically creates an IAM role called Organization Access Role. This allows users from the master account to switch into the new account without any further configuration. You can use root in the new accounts, but you have to go through the password reset process. So it can be enabled. The new sub-account email addresses, they will be sent all the marketing emails by default. So I only found this out recently. So if you manage a bunch of accounts and you get the same email, a dozen times, you can turn it off, and there is a link there. As I say, I only found that recently, so it's a good one. You're now at the point where the account exists. So you can role switch them from the master, but you can also automate the account process from the command line. So let's say you've got an environment that you want to spin up accounts almost dynamically. You can choose to do that. There are some tools to help with that, such as landing zone or control tower. I couldn't get on the control tower preview, otherwise I would have included some of that. But that's going to help with multi-account management in the long term, so I'd definitely look out for that when it comes out. I wanted to talk about service control policies. So these are important. You apply these to organizations. They're a bit like IAM policies, and allow you to restrict what happens in your child accounts, your sub-accounts. It affects all users, including root. I don't think that's made clear enough in the documentation. So if you apply a service control policy that says users of this account cannot use S3, and the users log in as root, they still can't use S3. Where you would use this is for things like disallowing the ability to turn off CloudTrail, for example. So you may set up CloudTrail in all your child accounts, and then even if you give your users root access, they can't turn it off, so your auditing is safe. It's also useful, for example, if you have a sandbox account or your playground, restricting any particularly expensive operations. So you've given your users this account that they can do anything they like in, but you might want to not let them order a snowmobile, for example, or reserve very expensive instances and that sort of thing, because you don't want that turning up on your doorstep. They've also just introduced fine-grained access controls, such as conditions and resources, so you can really drill down now to the detail of that control policy. So you've got all your accounts, and now you need to track usage. You need to keep your auditors happy for your auditing purposes. Luckily, CloudTrail and Config both offer cross-account, cross-region logging. So this process has changed recently, but essentially what happens is you create buckets in your security or your auditing account, and with sufficient policies to allow CloudTrail to write to it. You'll probably want to enable access logging, retention policies, and so on. In the master account now, you can enable a multi-region CloudTrail, tick a box to enable it across all your organization, and that will send everything to that bucket. You can get it to create the bucket for you as well, if you're doing it through the console. This is quite a new feature. Previously, you had to go into all of your other accounts and set up a CloudTrail, so that makes it a lot easier. On busy accounts, pro tip, if you're not analyzing the logs through CloudWatch Logs, I'd probably turn that feature off, because it does get very expensive very quickly. Your auditing data is all still available, and you can query it through the CloudTrail console or Athena now. So unless you have real-time analysis through Lambda or some such, I'd probably disable that. Config is also enabled in each region rather than each account. And again, configure it to send to a bucket. You can now create an aggregator in one of the accounts to bring all your config data together for analysis if you're doing that. So now your security and users account has full logging of all your API actions and all your state changes. So that's your full audit history, safe and secure, separate. You couple this with a suitable SCP to prevent disabling if you need that. But as I said, the new organization's CloudTrail makes it a lot easier. So you've got your accounts. You've got auditing configured. But you've only got the one role. We've got this organization access role. We need to be more restrictive, especially in production. But how do you define the roles? This is really difficult. It's actually the hardest part of the process. And it really depends on your business. You can define roles based on the team, on the staff role, developers or senior developers, non-certified and certified. So you really have to think about how you want to organize your users within your business. It's definitely one of the hardest points in the process, especially if you are coming from an environment where users have had quite unrestricted access and you need to apply more restrictive policies to them. Negotiating those political issues can be quite tricky. So the best thing to do is ensure you've got really good communication with your users to explain why you're making these changes and make it easy for them. Provide some incentives. Provide the sandbox account and say, yeah, we're going to make your production access really restricted, but we're giving you this playground over here. You can do anything you want over here. So that might make it easier. Also, try and get them to own the policies for their applications. Get them to learn and understand what their applications are doing. Provide the playground, the sandbox, so they can refine their policies before they hit development or production. And it makes it a bit easier. So they make changes and learn. In terms of suggested permissions, controversially, I'd say it's best to avoid managed policies. They're often far too open. So Elastic Beanstalk, for example, it has IAM patrol, S3 start, EC2 start, RDS start, lots of other things start for any resource. So you grant a developer access to this, and they've got access to a lot of your account. So if you are going to use managed policies, do review them very carefully. You want to separate control plane from data plane actions. This allows the user to manage the service without seeing the data within. Let's say DynamoDB. They give them the ability to manage read and write capacity units, to scale their service, to manage it, and keep it online. But if they don't need to read that data, then don't give them the ability to query. Allow them to do read-only control plane calls. So across the account, more or less allow them to read anything they like, to investigate a service. Look at what other teams and users have configured, how they've configured something. As we all know, learning is probably easier through the web console, so you can have a poke about and see what settings there are and see what it all does, before you then automate your infrastructure, however you're doing it. You probably want to restrict the data plane down to the relevant team and product. So give users of each team access to the correct buckets, and only if they need it, the correct DynamoDB access, for example. But be more flexible on roles used by automation. So this encourages the use of automation. users may not be able to do certain actions, but if you say, yeah, you can do that, as long as you've done it through the CD system, the CI/CD system. Encourages use of those tools. You probably still want to avoid destructive actions in automation, or very destructive actions. And you probably want to avoid IAM changes most of the time as well. Otherwise, it will allow applications to submit new policies and essentially privilege escalation. Also have a solid process and rapid response to requesting changes. If a user says, oh, I need to do this, be really quick and responsive and say, yeah, okay, we'll look at that, we'll get that changed, right, we've got that permission for you, done. But also have the conversation about why they need that permission. Let's see if they can change their application architecture slightly or do something in a different way to see if we can avoid needing it. But that's not always possible. Often it is necessary to do manual actions, especially when it comes to operations. Let's say you need to restore a database from snapshot or something like that. So you've got multiple accounts now. We've got auditing. We've decided how to set up the permissions. You probably don't want separate users in each account because that's more to manage. You want a centralized login, even if you're not using single sign-on through your corporate directory. So let's look at centralizing that through IAM. So in a centralized IAM store, the user and credentials only exist in one account. So in our layout, that was the security and users account. IAM policies in this account control which roles and accounts they can elevate to. Users will also have a self-managing policy, so they can still change their password, manage their MFA device, change their access keys, and so on. And the target accounts that we switch into have a trust policy that says, yeah, we'll allow anything from the user's account. And we rely on the permissions in the user's account to say which roles they can use. There's a really useful tool from AWS Labs for managing roles across multiple accounts. You can define a config in YAML, which accounts you have, which one's the parent, and it will generate CloudFormation with all the roles and permissions in that you need. So just have a look at the group policy. So here's how it works. User authenticates to IAM in the security account using MFA if they have it. I strongly recommend that. They then use the security token service to ask for credentials for the role that they want in the target account. IAM is checked again to see if the user is allowed to do that, and then they're issued credentials suitable for the target account. So just to look at the group policy. So in the user's account, you typically set policies on the groups and make users members of those groups that control which roles they're allowed to switch into. So what this says is the user that's in this group is allowed to assume the role administrators in the accounts all twos and all threes, and the role developers in the accounts all threes. Correspondingly, in those accounts, there's a target role, and that has a trust policy which says, oh, I trust everything from account ones, which would be the user's account. Remember, we controlled which users could get here based on their group membership in the user's account. We could restrict this down further. We could say, oh, certain users can switch into this role. You may want to do that for certain high privilege roles, but you'd have to manage and change this in all of your target accounts, which is quite a lot of overhead. Because we control the user's account, we can say, yeah, okay, we trust the directory. We'll delegate all the permission access to that. So how does this look to the user? So it does add an extra step. It's the traditional login process. Username, password, MFA, and so on. You then use the standard role switch process. So it's a drop down from the username, select switch role. You put in the role details, and then once you're in, the user drop down will reflect the fact that you're in a role in another account. It says what role you're in, what account you're in, and also your source user and source role. On the command line, it is a few extra steps. So you probably want to wrap this up in scripts to make it easy. You have to get you configure your access key and secret key in the usual way, but for the user's account. You get your MFA serial number, get user token, get temporary credentials which are MFA authenticated. You can then export these as environment variables, and then your session is currently MFA authenticated in the user's account. And then, that's skipped on. You then want to switch roles, so that's the assume role command. and this will give you another set of temporary credentials, but in the target account you wanted to go to. And if you then choose to export these as environment variables in your shell, then you are authenticated within that account in that role, which you can confirm with get caller identity. And now you're ready to perform actions under this role. This is a really useful command if you're not familiar with it. It'll just tell you who you are, and then you can try and understand why maybe the command you're trying to do doesn't work. So there are some other options for centralized login. We talked about centralized IAM, with the users stored in one account. You've also got external SAML, federated login, with systems like Azure, ADFS, directory services. I've put AWS SSO as a separate item. That's another option. It is just another SAML federation, but they've wrapped it all up together, make it easy to use. It even does the role management and so on for you. So that's a worthwhile investigating if you're new to this or you just want something quick. Or you can choose not to do this. You could choose to still maintain users in each of your accounts. That's a lot more overhead, but again, it's more isolation. If users have different sets of access keys, maybe different MFA tokens, maybe that's better for your organization. That's kind of up to you. So I have no idea on timing, but I think we're reaching the end now. So the key takeaway, think about your account layout. I'd recommend this method as a starting point. Isolate by environment. Provide a place for experimentation, sandbox. Centralize your users for ease of management. Centralize your logging and auditing to keep everybody happy there. And that's pretty much it. So I hope that's been particularly helpful. I know some people came up to me earlier and said, I'm really looking forward to this talk. So actually, I hope I've addressed some of your questions. I'll leave that up there for a minute, but I think we've got some time for Q&A. Yeah?
Where you had the access keys, do those access keys then apply to all the target accounts from the master account?
Yeah, so you have one set of access keys which belongs in your user's account for that one person. And then you use the assume rule to get temporary keys in the target accounts. All right, thank you.